Before I tell you what happened, I want you to ask yourself something. If your granddaughter, 7 years old, gap-toothed smile, still sleeps with a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons, came to you one evening with her little hands shaking and said, "Grandpa, don't let Grandma sign anything. I heard something really bad," would you listen to her? I'm asking because most people wouldn't. Most people would say, "Sweetheart, you misunderstood. Adults talk about complicated things." Most people would pat her on the head and go back to their coffee. I'm 63 years old. I've been wrong about a lot of things in my life, but listening to my granddaughter that night is not one of them. Her name is Rosie, and she saved everything I'd spent 40 years building. My name isn't important. What matters is this: I built a small commercial real estate company from nothing. Started in my late 20s with one rented desk in a strip mall in Columbus, Ohio. By the time I turned 60, we had 14 properties across 3 states, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and a portfolio worth just over $4 million. Nothing compared to the big boys on the coasts. But it was mine. Every lease signed, every renovation decision, every tenant dispute. I was there for all of it. I had a son. His name is Kevin. He's 34 now. Married a woman named Audra about 6 years ago. Audra is, and I say this as a man who tried very hard to like her, a woman who calculates everything. The way she smiles at you right before she wants something from you. The way she calls you Dad when she needs a favor, and your father when she's speaking to Kevin about something she disapproves of. I noticed these things. I filed them away, but Kevin loved her, and I loved Kevin. So I kept my mouth shut, and I kept my mouth shut, and I kept the peace. My wife, Rosie's grandmother, passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 14 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. The kind of fast that doesn't give you time to say everything you needed to say. After she died, I rattled around in our house for about 8 months before Kevin and Audra suggested I move into a smaller place closer to them in Dublin, which is a suburb outside Columbus. Nice area. Good schools for Rosie. I agreed. It felt like the right thing. I was lonely in that big house, and Rosie, she was 3 then, was just starting to become a real little person, and I didn't want to miss it. So I sold the house, moved into a 2-bedroom condo 6 minutes from Kevin's place, and I started spending Tuesday and Thursday afternoons with Rosie while Kevin worked and Audra ran her boutique resale business online. Those 2 afternoons a week became the best part of my life. Now I need to tell you about a man named Conrad. Conrad Ashby. He came into my life about 2 years ago through a business connection. A property manager I used named Gil introduced us at a charity golf scramble out in Westerville. Conrad was in his late 40s, good-looking in that polished way, the kind of man who wore the right watch and knew exactly how to give a compliment that made you feel intelligent rather than flattered. He told me he was a financial advisor specializing in estate planning and business succession. Said he worked with a lot of small business owners who were reaching retirement age and didn't have a clean plan in place for what happens to the business when they're gone. That was me. Exactly me. I didn't have a clean succession plan. Kevin had shown some interest in the business over the years, but never committed fully. He had his own career in logistics management and seemed content there. I'd been meaning to get everything sorted legally, talk to an estate attorney, figure out whether to sell the portfolio outright or transfer it gradually, or set up some kind of trust. I'd been meaning to do it for 3 years and kept putting it off because it felt like planning for my own irrelevance. Conrad made it easy to talk about. He was patient. He explained things in plain language. We had lunch twice. He came to my office once to walk through the properties with me on paper. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no reason to suspect, was that Conrad had been seeing Audra for almost a year before that golf scramble. I found that out later, from Rosie. But I'm getting ahead of myself. About 8 months after I met Conrad, he proposed something to me. He said there was a way to protect my assets from estate taxes, transfer value to Kevin gradually over time, and simultaneously give the business better liquidity by bringing in a co-managing partner. He called it a family limited partnership restructuring. He said it was standard practice for portfolios in my range. He had documents, clean, professional-looking documents with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize at the top. He said I would remain the general partner with full management authority, but that a new entity would be created, and Kevin and Audra would be listed as limited partners holding a combined 49% interest. Conrad's firm would serve as the administrative trustee in a supporting capacity. He said I should have my own attorney review it before signing. I said I would. I genuinely meant to. But Conrad kept gently nudging, saying there were tax deadlines, fiscal year timing issues that we needed to execute before the end of Q3 or the tax benefit window would close for another year. I was busy. I trusted him, and I trusted Kevin. That was my mistake. I never had my own attorney review those documents. I signed them on a Tuesday afternoon in Conrad's office while Rosie was at summer camp. What I didn't read carefully, what I signed without fully understanding, was a clause buried in Section 7 of the partnership agreement. It was written in a way that allowed the limited partners to petition for a forced buyout of the general partner under specific triggering conditions. The language was vague enough to be dangerous. Material change in the general partner's capacity to manage, combined with a supermajority vote of limited partners. Kevin held 24%, Audra held 25%. Conrad's administrative entity, as trustee, held an additional 2% advisory interest with limited co-voting rights on structural decisions. They had 51% if they voted together, and they were planning to use it. I didn't know any of this until a Thursday afternoon in October. Rosie and I had spent the afternoon doing what we always did. She'd been working on a poster for a school project about monarch butterflies, and I'd been sitting across the kitchen table from her with a cup of coffee and the newspaper, and we were just there together, comfortable and quiet in the way that only happens with people you completely trust. Around 4 o'clock, she asked if she could use my phone to play a game, and I handed it over and went to the living room to watch the tail end of a game. About 20 minutes later, she came and found me. She wasn't playing the game anymore. She was holding my phone with both hands, and her face had that careful look, the one she gets when she's working out whether to tell me something or not. She climbed up next to me on the couch, and she leaned in close. She said, very quietly, "Grandpa, I heard something at home, and I don't think I was supposed to hear it." I turned off the TV. I said, "Okay, sweetheart, tell me." She told me that 2 nights ago, she'd woken up in the middle of the night to get water. She'd come downstairs and heard her mum on the phone in the kitchen. The light was on under the door. Rosie said her mum sounded different than usual, like how she talks to her work friends, not how she talks to Daddy. She heard her mother say a name, Conrad, and she heard her mother say, "Once the old man signs the amendment, we're done." The 3 of us split it clean. Rosie looked at me. She said, "Who's the old man, Grandpa?" I sat very still. I said, "Did you hear anything else?" She thought hard. She said her mum had laughed and said something like, "Kevin thinks it's just an estate update. He doesn't need to know the rest." Then she said, "Grandpa, are you okay? You look like you're going to be sick." I told her I was fine. I gave her a hug and told her she did the right thing, telling me. I asked her please not to mention this to anyone at home. Not Mum, not Dad, nobody. I told her it was our secret for right now, just like how we kept my surprise birthday plans secret last spring. She nodded very seriously. She said, "Okay, but Grandpa, don't sign anything, okay? Promise me." I promised her. I drove home that night, and I sat in my living room until 2 in the morning, and I thought about every conversation I'd had with Conrad over the past 8 months, every document, every deadline he'd mentioned, every small urgency he'd manufactured. And then I thought about Audra, the way she'd started calling me more often lately. The lunches she'd suggested, suddenly interested in how I was feeling, how the portfolio was performing, the way she'd casually mentioned twice that Kevin was really ready to step up in the business if I ever wanted to start stepping back a little. I thought about my son, my Kevin. He doesn't need to know the rest. Did he know? Was he part of it? Or was he also being used? I didn't sleep that night. The first thing I did the next morning was call a man named Elliot. Elliot Marsh. He's an attorney I'd used years ago for a lease dispute. Sharp, no nonsense, the kind of man who reads the footnotes. I told him I needed to see him that day. He made room. I brought every document Conrad had ever given me, every email, every version of the partnership agreement. I sat across from Elliot and I watched his face while he read. Elliot doesn't rattle easily. He's been practicing for 30 years, but about 10 minutes in, he took his glasses off and rubbed his eyes and said, "Norman, did you have anyone review this before you signed it?" I told him no. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The good news is you haven't signed the amendment yet. Whatever amendment they're preparing, that's the piece that would have completed it." He walks me through Section 7 in a way that no one had ever explained it to me. Forced buyout clause, supermajority trigger, the administrative trustee role that Conrad had built for himself, that 2% that, combined with Audra's 25, gave them the votes they needed if they executed the amendment and then triggered the clause. The plan, as Elliot reconstructed it, was probably this: get me to sign the amendment, which would likely expand the trustees' co-voting rights slightly, framed as an administrative update. And then, shortly after, call a vote, declare me unfit or unwilling to manage, force a buyout at a price they controlled, walk away with the portfolio restructured under their control, with Kevin holding his minority slice, and none the wiser about what Audra and Conrad had actually engineered. Elliot said, "This is fraud. Potentially multiple counts. But here's what we need to do. We need to gather evidence before we do anything. We do not tip them off. Can you do that?" I said yes. He told me to act normal, keep taking Conrad's calls. If the amendment arrived, tell Conrad I was reviewing it. Don't sign, don't refuse, just stall. Meanwhile, Elliot would file a quiet request with the county to flag any transfer filings related to my properties, and he'd bring in a forensic accountant to look at the partnership documents for any evidence of prior unauthorized filings. I walked out of his office, and I drove to Rosie's school, and I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes, just breathing. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my life, and I have buried a wife, so I do not say that lightly. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I sat across from Rosie at that kitchen table, and I drank my coffee and helped her with homework, and I acted like everything was fine. I had dinner at Kevin and Audra's house on a Sunday, and I watched Audra pour wine and laugh at something on TV, and I kept my face completely calm. Conrad called me twice, both times about the amendment. Both times I told him I was still having my attorney look it over. No rush, I'd be in touch. He got slightly tighter in his voice each time, more insistent about the deadline. I wrote down everything he said, timestamps and all, and I emailed it to Elliot the same evening. Rosie, for her part, was extraordinary. She never said a word about what she'd told me. She acted like herself, drawing her butterflies, arguing about bedtime, asking me approximately 47 questions per visit about whether monarch butterflies could feel sad. The only sign that she remembered was one Thursday when I was getting my coat to leave, and she came to the door and put her arms around me and said very quietly into my shoulder, "You didn't sign anything, right, Grandpa?" I told her not one word. She pulled back and looked at me and gave me that gap-toothed smile and said, "Good, you're too smart to trick." I had to walk out to my car before she saw my eyes. Elliot called me on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after our first meeting. He said, "We have enough." The forensic accountant had found something in the original partnership filing. Conrad's entity had been listed incorrectly, not as an administrative trustee, but as a managing member of a sub-entity, which under Ohio law gave him direct fiduciary responsibility and a conflict of interest he had never disclosed to me. That alone was a serious breach of his registration as a financial advisor with the SEC. On top of that, Elliot had obtained phone records through a civil discovery filing, and the calls between Conrad and Audra going back 14 months were documented. Calls on the same days as my meetings with Conrad, calls the evening after I signed the original agreement. Then there was the amendment itself. Conrad had emailed it to me the week prior. Elliot had gone through it line by line. Buried in the amendment was a provision that reclassified 2 of my best-performing properties as partnership assets eligible for voluntary sale, meaning, once I signed, Conrad and Audra could vote to liquidate those properties and distribute the proceeds. Properties I owned free and clear, worth close to $900,000 combined. $900,000. That's what they were after. A clean, quiet theft, dressed up in legal language, executed by a man I'd trusted, and a woman I'd let into my family. Elliot had already been in contact with the Ohio Division of Securities, who regulate financial advisors, and he had filed a civil complaint that morning in Franklin County Common Pleas Court. The motion included a request for a temporary restraining order preventing any transfers, amendments, or votes related to the partnership pending the outcome of the case. The restraining order was granted by 2 o'clock that afternoon. The calls started the next morning. Conrad first. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it that I recognized as the sound a person makes when they realize the door has closed in front of them. He said there had been a misunderstanding, that he wanted to meet and clarify the documents, that he was sure we could resolve this without involving the courts. I told him my attorney would be handling all communications from this point forward. He called back twice more that day. Elliot handled both. Audra called Kevin. Kevin called me. That was the conversation I had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure for 3 weeks. He asked me what was happening. He sounded genuinely confused, which told me a great deal. I asked him to come to my condo that evening, just the 2 of us. He came. I showed him everything. The documents, the amendment, the phone records, the forensic accounting report, the SEC conflict of interest finding. Kevin sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Rosie drew butterflies, and he went completely pale. He asked me twice if I was certain. I told him yes. I told him that Audra had been coordinating with Conrad for over a year. I told him that the plan was to use his equity stake to vote me out and liquidate nearly $1 million in assets, and that he was most likely intended to receive his 24% and nothing more, while Conrad and Audra split the rest. Kevin is 34 years old, and he is my son, and I watched him age 10 years in about 45 minutes at my kitchen table. He asked me how I found out. I told him the truth. I told him Rosie heard a phone call. I told him what she'd heard. I told him that a 7-year-old had more loyalty to this family than the adults who were supposed to protect it. Kevin put his head in his hands, and he stayed that way for a long time. I didn't rush him. I just made us both coffee, and I sat there and I let him work through it. The civil case took about 8 months to resolve. The short version, Conrad's license was suspended by the Ohio Division of Securities, pending a full investigation. The original partnership agreement was voided by the court on the basis of fraudulent misrepresentation and undisclosed conflicts of interest. My properties reverted to my sole ownership, unencumbered. The Franklin County Prosecutor's Office opened a criminal investigation into Conrad and Audra. Conrad entered a plea arrangement in the spring. 2 counts of securities fraud, 3 years of supervised probation, disgorgement of fees, and a permanent bar from working as a financial advisor in Ohio. Audra's situation is still working through the courts as of now, but she faces civil liability and potentially criminal charges depending on what the prosecutors decide. I am not going to tell you how I feel about any of that, other than to say that justice doesn't feel the way you expect it to. It doesn't feel triumphant. It feels like closing a wound. It's necessary, and you're grateful for it, but it doesn't undo the scar. Kevin and Audra separated last spring. Their divorce will be finalized sometime this year. Kevin is doing better than I expected. He's back to himself mostly, throwing himself into his work, and he's been a good father to Rosie through all of it. I'm proud of him for that. He moved back closer to me. We have dinner on Sundays now, the 3 of us. It's become our thing. Elliot asked me once, during the case, how I managed to hold it together for those 3 weeks, showing up to dinner at Kevin's house, taking Conrad's calls, acting normal. He said most people in my position would have confronted someone immediately and blown the whole thing open. I told him the truth. I held together because I made a promise to a 7-year-old. Rosie had put her hands on my arms and looked me right in the eyes and said, "Don't sign anything, Grandpa. Promise me." And I promised her. And when I was sitting across from Audra, watching her pour wine, that's what I thought about, that I had promised Rosie. There's a lesson in that, and I'm not sure I can articulate it cleanly, but I'll try. Children notice everything. They notice the phone call at midnight. They notice the tone of voice that doesn't match the words. They notice the thing you think you're hiding. We spend so much energy keeping things from them to protect them, and sometimes they're the ones quietly protecting us. Rosie is 8 now. She started 2nd grade this fall. She's moved on from mollet butterflies to deep-sea creatures. She told me recently that anglerfish are misunderstood and that the male and female biologically fuse together, which she delivered as fact with complete calm while eating a grilled cheese sandwich. Every Thursday afternoon she still comes to my condo. We still sit at that kitchen table. She draws, I have my coffee. We talk about anglerfish and school and whatever's on her mind. Before she leaves, she almost always hugs me at the door. Last week she said, "Grandpa, are things okay now?" Like, for real? I told her yes, for real. She nodded like she was filing that away officially, satisfied. Then she put on her backpack and she went out to the car where Kevin was waiting. I stood in the doorway and watched them drive away, and I thought, 63 years old, and the best thing I ever did was listen to this child. If she ever tells me something again, anything, no matter how small, I will stop whatever I'm doing, turn off the television, and I will listen. I hope you would do the same. I've thought a lot about what actually made this whole thing possible. Not Elliot's legal work, as good as it was, not the forensic accountant, not the restraining order, not any of it. What made it possible was 3 weeks of silence from a 7-year-old who understood, without anyone explaining it to her, that some things have to be handled carefully before they're handled at all. That's not something most adults can do. I think about the choices that led Conrad and Audra to that place. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to become the kind of person who builds a 14-month scheme to rob a 63-year-old man of everything he spent his life building. It happens in small steps. A small rationalization here, a small compromise there he probably won't notice. He trusts us. He's getting older anyway. Each step makes the next one easier, until one day you're on the phone at midnight telling someone that once the old man signs, we're done, and it doesn't even feel like what it is. That's how people end up where Conrad and Audra ended up. Not in a single dramatic decision, but in a long, quiet drift away from their own integrity. And the thing about that kind of drift is that it always arrives somewhere. The math always resolves. You can delay it. You can dress it up in legal language. You can use words like estate restructuring and fiscal year timing to make it feel sophisticated. But what you build on a crooked foundation will eventually show you what it's made of. I wasn't innocent in this either. I need to say that clearly. I signed documents I didn't read. I let urgency override caution. I trusted because it was easier than verifying, and I knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, that something felt slightly off about Conrad's timelines, and I ignored it because I didn't want the hassle. That was my failure of judgment, and it almost cost me everything. The difference between a mistake you survive and one you don't is usually whether you're paying attention when the warning arrives. I was lucky. My warning came from Rosie, with her hand shaking and her eyes serious, asking me if I was okay. Most people's warnings don't come that clearly. Most people's warnings are easier to dismiss. What I want to pass on, not as a moral lesson, just as something I know now in a way I didn't before, is that intelligence without honesty is just a sharper tool for doing damage. Conrad was intelligent. He understood financial instruments, legal structures, human psychology. He knew exactly how to make a man feel respected and understood while walking him toward a trap. That intelligence, in the service of deception, produced nothing except a suspended license, a criminal record, and a life he'll spend years rebuilding. Meanwhile, Rosie, 8 years old, 2nd grade, currently convinced that anglerfish are underappreciated, made one clear-eyed, courageous choice to tell the truth to someone she loved, even though she wasn't sure what it would mean. That one choice, built on nothing but honesty and loyalty, changed everything. I'm 63. I made 1,000 decisions in my life. Some good, some not. But I'll tell you this much. The ones I'm most proud of are not the clever ones. They're the ones where I did the honest thing when it would have been easier not to, where I chose to look clearly at what was in front of me instead of what I wanted to see. That's the only thing I know for certain that actually compounds over time. Not money, not strategy, Just a habit of seeing clearly and telling the truth, even when it's hard, even when you're 7 years old and you're not sure your grandfather will believe you. Rosie believed I would listen. She was right, and I intend to spend whatever years I have left making sure she stays right about that.